When most people think of Florida, what often comes to mind is a picture of wealth. As America's third largest state economy, it attracts rich tourists and retirees from across the country and the entire world. But as you move away from Disneyland and Miami, the picture starts to become bleak. Florida has one of the highest poverty rates in the US, especially in areas like the Panhandle, where 1 in 4 people live in poverty, with this figure rising to 40% of children in the area. To make matters worse, for those already living in poverty, Florida experiences some of the most extreme weather in the US, including frequent, powerful hurricanes. These, of course, destroy towns and entire communities, but their impact is often made worse by poor governance. The rapid development of agricultural and natural lands for residential use often replaces wetlands and other natural buffers with concrete and buildings, reducing the land's ability to absorb storm surge and rainfall. This increases flooding during hurricanes, turning natural disasters into preventable crises. Despite recurring disasters, state policies continue to prioritize short-term gains over sustainable development, allowing construction even in high-risk areas. While Florida's major cities rank as some of the richest per capita in the US, many parts of the state aren't as lucky. In fact, across Florida, around half of all households are struggling to cover their living expenses. Rather ironically, since the pandemic, Florida has actually been one of America's best performing states in terms of economic growth. But unfortunately, for the vast majority of the state's citizens, this means nothing. As Florida has become more and more popular for tourists and retirees alike, people have been flooding to the state, boosting demand in the economy, but also increasing the prices of almost all essentials of daily life. In areas like Tampa Bay, rent surged by over 25% during the pandemic, and even though this has slowed, rents remain high, with many people spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And what makes this all worse is that wages are not keeping up pace, meaning every year people in Florida can afford less and less. Since the pandemic, wages in Florida have been growing at around 5% every year. But in this same period, the cost for a family of 4 jumped from $66,000 to $81,000, a 22% increase. Even though Florida's economy has been booming, what goes on behind the scenes in the Sunshine State is another story. So let's take a look at why Florida is America's most broken state, and if it can be fixed. In the process of making these videos, there's a lot of behind the scenes work. But for anyone looking to get started out where this seems intimidating, you can check out today's sponsor, InVideo.ai, the world's most used AI video creator with over 10 million users across more than 150 countries. It puts you in the driver's seat and works as your personal sidekick, being the perfect co-pilot. Just come in here and type a prompt. From there, it will create the first cut of your video, complete with everything. Want to translate to another language? No problem. You can use the text prompts to change parts of the videos you don't like.
Eso es un enorme aumento de más del 12,000%.
And you can also add your voice and ask InVideo to clone it for other projects. So if you're interested in checking it out, you can get started today for free, but I'd highly recommend choosing the paid plan that starts as low as $20 a month. What's good about this is that it will save you hundreds of dollars by combining the features of different tools all packed into one. Just click on the link in the description or scan the QR code that's on the screen and use my code to get 2 times the number of video generation credits in the first month. And now let's get back to the video. Much of the reasons why Florida is in its current state is driven by its unique geographical location. Wide areas of flat land and rich soil made it the ideal place for agricultural development, creating many jobs as citrus fruits were exported across the country. But by the late 1800s, an industry which Florida has now become renowned for was starting to gain speed: tourism. America's rich and famous were beginning to come to the state for vacation in the winter, and with the expansion of railroads and travel links, by the early 1900s, thousands of tourists were coming to Florida. They came to stay in the new hotels, rest in the warm weather, and enjoy the natural beauty. Developers soon realized that Florida's sunshine was its greatest asset, and all across the state, land was continuing to be developed, being known as the greatest real estate development in the world. This was ultimately a bubble which popped with the Great Depression, but it was in the 1940s when the state really began to take off. The end of World War II ushered in an economic boom across the United States, and Florida was no exception. Returning veterans and their families were attracted by the state's warm climate and growing job opportunities. This created a rapid population increase, with Florida's population rising from about 2.5 million in 1940 to over 4 million by 1960. At the same time, the military and expanding space sector also helped diversify the jobs in the state. But whilst this was all happening, tourism was once again booming and quickly became Florida's biggest source of income. The point when this was noticeable was in 1971, when Florida became home to one of the largest resorts in the world, Walt Disney World. In the first year, this 28,000-acre park brought about $14 billion to Orlando's economy. It became clear that if the state wanted to make a lot of money, tourism was the way to go, and Florida encouraged other developers to build many other attractions all across the state. People didn't stop moving either, and the state's population surged from approximately 6 million in 1970 to over 15 million people by the end of the century, creating a pressing demand for new housing. The post-war baby boom generation was beginning to reach retirement age in the late 20th century. As this demographic sought suitable living arrangements, Florida emerged as a prime destination. Properties started springing up all across the state, especially in the big cities, primarily being holiday homes or retirement ones, making Florida synonymous with retirement living. By the turn of the century, it was clear that the state had fundamentally changed. Manufacturing, military spending, and agriculture, while once significant contributors to Florida's economy, were beginning to die. And in its place, 3 industries rose up to dominate Florida's economy. Altogether, tourism, real estate, and retirement add close to $250 billion to Florida's economy every year. While these bring in massive amounts of revenue, each comes with their own issues, which are slowly crippling the economy. Starting with tourism. Behind Florida's booming tourism industry is a workforce that keeps everything running. They are the lifeblood of a sector worth over $100 billion annually, but more often than not, they are doing this for wages that don't cover their cost of living. In 2024, nearly 10% of people in Florida worked in tourism, reaching around 2 million total. And while the sheer amount of money being brought in might suggest these workers are doing well, the reality is starkly different. Tourism jobs in hotels, restaurants, and attractions typically pay close to minimum wage, leaving many workers struggling to make ends meet. For example, the average salary for hospitality workers in Central Florida is about $41,000 per year, while a single adult needs at least $46,645 annually to cover basic expenses. This financial strain is even greater for single parents, who require $77,515 a year to support themselves and a child. In 2020, leisure and hospitality workers earned a median hourly wage of just $13 in Florida, far below the $22 per hour needed for a stable livelihood. Despite billions in revenue flowing into the tourism industry, much of that wealth never reaches the pockets of everyday workers. What makes this worse is the nature of this industry of work in the Sunshine State. Tourism in Florida is highly seasonal, and the state experiences a flood of visitors during certain months, creating a temporary surge in demand for workers. Workers face a feast or famine scenario, where during the peak season, jobs are abundant and shifts are long. But once the off-season hits, hours are cut back, or jobs disappear altogether. Many employees are left underemployed for months, without the stability that salaried positions often provide. And in times of economic downturn, like the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic, tourism-based jobs are often the first to vanish, leaving workers without an income or a safety net. Tourism also deeply affects the future of Florida and its people's ability to grow and earn more money, as it affects a fundamental element of economic growth. Productivity. This is the efficiency with which goods and services are produced. Take a look at this map here. It shows the productivity of workers in America's major metro areas. When we take a closer look at Florida, we can see that even though their cities produce a lot of money, they're often incredibly inefficient with really low productivity. This means that compared to a city like LA, cities in Florida require far more input, whether it be man-hours or something else, to produce the same level of output. This isn't surprising when you consider that the majority of Florida's jobs are in low-wage sectors like hospitality and tourism, industries that generate far less revenue per employee than high-tech or financial industries. Because tourism jobs often don't require advanced skills or education, there is less incentive for individuals in these positions to pursue higher education. This map shows how significant this effect is, as it shows the level of college-educated individuals in the state compared to the national average, where we can see that on the whole across the state, people are far less educated than they are in the rest of the country. This is a problem. While it's true a college degree doesn't automatically mean a better life, it often gives you far better job opportunities. And without this, many workers are locked into a cycle of low-paying seasonal jobs, which limits opportunities for upward mobility. The focus on tourism over high-tech or finance also means that Florida doesn't attract as many high-wage, high-productivity industries. Adding to the pressure, Florida's tourism boom has driven up housing costs, particularly in areas like Miami, Orlando, and along the coast. Florida has experienced a 164% increase in average home prices over the past decade, driven especially by a surge in demand for vacation rentals and second homes. This leaves local residents, especially low-wage tourism workers, struggling to afford housing. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Miami is around $2,610, while a two-bedroom averages about $3,359. This positions Miami among the most expensive rental markets in the United States. For those earning meager wages in tourism, finding affordable housing becomes nearly impossible. Many are forced into long commutes from distant, more affordable areas, or worse, into overcrowded and substandard living conditions. Further development isn't helping either, as property in Florida is increasingly treated as a financial commodity rather than a place to live. Investors, particularly those looking to capitalize on short-term rental platforms like Airbnb, are snapping up homes, not to live in, but as investments or lucrative rentals for tourists. This speculative growth has driven home prices even higher. The occupancy rates for short-term rentals are notably high, with Orlando and Key West reporting 61% and 63% respectively. What this means is that properties used for vacation rentals are in constant demand, encouraging investors to keep converting homes into short-term rentals. While this benefits the tourism industry by providing more options for visitors, it reduces the availability of long-term rental options for residents. As a result, home prices continue to rise. What may seem like a win for tourism is directly contributing to the housing shortage faced by many locals. While Florida's real estate market may appear to be thriving, it's primarily benefiting wealthy investors rather than the residents who work in the state. And locals face stiff competition in an already tightening market. The state's heavy reliance on speculative real estate and short-term rentals makes things even shakier, echoing the boom and bust cycle we saw during the 2008 financial crisis. In the long run, depending so much on real estate growth just isn't sustainable. But it's not just real estate speculation and short-term rentals that are having a negative impact on the state, but also its reputation as a retirement haven. Florida has long attracted retirees from across the country, offering warm weather, tax advantages, and an idyllic lifestyle. While this influx of retirees boosts certain sectors, it also creates a number of challenges that ripple through the state. The rapid growth of retirement communities isn't slowing either, particularly the Villages, Florida's largest retirement community. Between July 2022 and July 2023, the Villages grew by 4.7%, making it the fastest growing metropolitan area in the US. With a population now exceeding 151,000, it has been the top-selling planned community for 11 consecutive years. Retirees, of course, bring wealth with them, often purchasing homes and contributing to the real estate market, but they don't actively participate in the workforce. As more retirees move to Florida, the state's overall productivity suffers. They are also placing increasing strain on the state's public infrastructure, particularly healthcare. This imbalance is already reflected in Florida's lower productivity, and the situation is expected to worsen. The current ratio of tax-paying workers to retirees is 3:1, but by 2030 it is expected to drop to 2:1 as baby boomers continue to age out of the workforce. With a shrinking workforce paying less and less to tax revenue, and an expanding retiree population heavily reliant on public services, the pressure on Florida's infrastructure will grow. In 2022 alone, the state added nearly 500,000 new residents, many of whom are retirees or wealthy transplants, which exacerbates the strain. This demographic shift threatens the sustainability of the state. More non-working people, who get tax cuts, are coming every year to use Florida's services, whether it's roads, transport systems, or healthcare. And while the provision of these services remains relatively constant, essential services for the workforce will be increasingly underfunded and unavailable. The steady influx of retirees also doesn't drive innovation or economic diversification. Unlike tech hubs like California or financial centers like New York, Florida's economy is centered on low-wage service jobs and real estate, which do little to boost productivity or foster long-term growth. As the retiree population grows, Florida risks becoming over-reliant on sectors that cater to an aging demographic, like healthcare and local services, without developing industries that can push the state forward economically. While retirees bring pensions and social security income, their spending is concentrated in these narrow sectors, which doesn't significantly benefit the broader workforce or drive economic advancement. So where does this leave the Sunshine State? Unfortunately for those living in Florida, decades of migration trends and a lack of economic vision have left many people in the state in an uncomfortable position. Most of the jobs are in low-paying sectors that offer little opportunity for upward mobility, whilst the cost of living surrounding them increases rapidly every year. And judging on current trends, it seems like these trends aren't going to be changing quickly. As the state has shifted from being a swing state to a more reliable Republican state, it seems like the policies they pursue will only attract more and more retirees. By 2030, Florida is expected to add 2.7 million more senior citizens to its current population, while the working population continues to shrink, albeit slowly. Despite dominating news headlines for leading America's economic surge, the Sunshine State looks like it has a long way to go before it provides better outcomes for the majority of its citizens.